Underwriting for the Money Doctor Show is provided by Ryan and Casey Liquors, Main Street, Greenfield. Exploring the world, one glass at a time. West County Equipment Rental of Shelburne. Daily, weekly, monthly rentals. 625-6463 or on the web at westcountyequipment.com. The Franklin County Community Development Corporation. Growing sustainable businesses and communities since 1979. www.fccdc.org. Weld Communications, Marketing and Publicity. Helping businesses spread the word in the Pioneer Valley and beyond. www.weldwords.com.
There's a better life if I could be debt free, but all my money is a mystery. I was feeling overwhelmed and it was wearing thin when I knocked on the door and heard the doctor's in. Oh, the doctor's in, the doctor's in. She got the right prescription to help you win. Oh, the doctor's in, the money doctor's in.
Hello and welcome to the Money Doctor Show. I'm Dr. Frances Rayam, president of Power Down Debt, a positive debt management company. And my guest today is Jack Baker, who is, I don't know how to bill you. I say you're a famous musician, you're a production professional, and local people might know you from Barrett and Baker Office Supply.
Absolutely.
How would you bill yourself?
I guess I'm a combination of all.
You are?
I'm still a 60s hippie. No, I never was a hippie. I don't want to get that. I'm still in the 50s and the early 60s.
Yeah.
And it never left me. So even when I was at Barrett and Baker's, I still had that attitude, that early 60s record man attitude, and it never lost it.
Well,
and
I can see why you would, because you had so much fun doing this in the 60s.
We did have
Yeah.
and then we started making jingles in the early 90s.
Yep.
And never quit.
Okay, so let's go get a little background on you. You had a famous record, a top 25 hit record called Bust Out.
Right, I had that's right, with the group called the Busters.
With the Busters, okay. Yes. So before you had this record, you started out in the music business like anybody else. You played rhythm guitar in 1957?
That's what I started doing. 1956.
56, okay.
Donnie Gates lived right there in Chapman Street in Greenfield, and his wife and, not his wife, but his mother and his father were very interested in the band and wanted to promote anything their son was with, and gave us the place to play. And we were just lucky enough to get involved with people that were good. I mean, we were terrible in the beginning, and they'd bring another guy in, and that guy was a little better than us, and we'd learn from him. And then they brought another guy in, and he was much better than the other guy.
Yeah.
And so we all stuck together.
Sure.
over the a period of 5 or 6 years, and got to play the colleges, and got to play when we got older into the joints, and then to New York, and then got
ended up with this record.
Oh yeah, we made a lot of records during that period of time. That group was very lucky. Even when I was in high school, and that would be 1958, 1959, we were playing colleges.
Yes.
And we got tangled up with the Budweiser beer outfit up there in Rutland, and he would book us into these places like Dartmouth and Middlebury, and UMass and Amherst and Smith. And
you had to be good to be getting those bookings.
Well,
sure.
There wasn't a lot of competition either. Remember, this is 1958, 1959, 1957. There wasn't a lot of groups to pick from, and we could make a lot of noise.
Was this when you were the Midnight Rockers?
Yes.
And then you became the Sapphires?
Well, the Midnight Rockers, and then the Sapphires, and then the Northern Lights. The Northern Lights is when it started to really fly.
Okay, so when did the Midnight Rockers became the Northern Lights? When did the Northern Lights become the
Busters?
The Busters.
1963.
Okay.
And if we're going to get into that, the Northern Lights had made a lot of tapes at Bell Sound, which is incidentally one of the best studios in Manhattan.
Tell us who was in the Northern Lights. Who were the band members?
Let's see. We had Francis Parda, and we had myself, and we had Freddie Cole, we had Bill Madden, and his was a big part of that group. Bill Madden Parents helped us, and we got an album, and some of the financing came from them, and we paid it back from the gigs that we had. And let's see, I'm going to forget somebody. Dick Knorr was in that group.
Interesting.
Al Marzik, and
I know people out there will be, as soon as you say these names, people out there will be remembering.
John Kowecki was another one. John Chappell.
And John Chappell, guitarist, right?
Player.
Yeah.
Excellent guitar player. Yeah. And he had that, I don't know if it was Boston Conservatory or Berkeley School. He graduated from that and played with Hank Snow up in Canada. Wow. And he was well versed, and we started to make leaps and bounds after he got into the group because of his experience that he had prior to that.
How'd you meet John Chappell?
John, I don't know. John Kowecki, who was in the group, was a neighbor of Chappell, and Phil Madden and John Chappell used to ride to Boston together because they were going to school down in Boston. So I guess they started talking, and one day John showed up at the rehearsal, and when he started playing the guitar, that's all that we needed. I mean, he was fabulous.
Who was the piano player? You wanted a piano player in, even though there wasn't a piano player in Bust Out.
Well, Bust Out was never cut by the Busters. It ended up that way, but Bust Out was cut by the Northern Lights. Right. And it was a song called Typhoid.
Yes.
And it was on an original album by the Northern Lights. Yeah. And Dick Erickson.
Dick Erickson, that's who it was,
Erickson was, I mean.
And he played piano so well, you wanted him.
Oh, yes. I mean, I wanted the voice, and I wanted the keyboards, and I really would have liked to have a Hammond organ. So if you could play keyboards, I would have, I mean, if you could play the piano, you can deal with the organ. And I wanted that big sound. Yeah. So we hired him, and we hired another guy out of East Hampton, out of Holyoke, Francis
Lafreniere?
Dick Lafreniere.
Dick Lafreniere, from the Invaders, Right.
Well, and he played with the Bowl, which had several big records in the late 60s. But he originally got his start with us.
Is it true that Fran Parda went into the high school English class?
Evidently. I mean, I've heard that story, but I don't know.
The story is he goes into the English class and gets Dick Lafreniere.
Goes in the high school looking for Lafreniere, because Lafreniere was playing those clubs down in Springfield even when he was in high school. It was a different era in 1960 than it was today. Sure. And he was playing those clubs at night, and we were looking for him, and somebody said, you go up to the high school, you'll find him. And that's what happened.
Tell me about Harry Finfer.
Oh, Harry was my friend. Harry Finfer, there's all kinds of stuff on the internet. I'm sure that you've probably done your homework. Harry Finfer was a record distributor in Philadelphia.
They called him the Old Fox. But the guy, the Old Fox,
But he'd had Jamie Records, him and a lawyer down in Philly, and a celebrity down in Philly had this label called Jamie, and they had Dwayne Eddy on that label, and that's what got him started, along with his record distributing company that he had in Philly, and very well known, very well connected in the music business, and ended up to be a good friend of mine for many, many years.
How much older than you was he?
Harry was probably 55, 50, and I was 21, 22. He was quite a bit older.
You looked up to him.
But he was very well set up in the music business, and we got along great. I mean,
that's cool.
Harry and I he's one of my best friends, or was one of my best friends.
That's so neat. So give us a little background on this. You're playing out, you're doing great playing, you're starting to write original music.
Oh, that's what we started with first, was the original music.
Which really wasn't done like before the Beatles, right?
No, it wasn't. But, everybody in that band bought in a little song that they had put together and written, and we worked them out. And with John Chappell in that group, we had a real basis for a beginning, a middle, and an end.
He'd studied theory, I'm sure.
Right, he knew what he was doing. Yeah, so then we were getting this money coming in from the colleges, because we were making great money at the colleges.
Will you tell us how much? What was great money in those days?
Oh, $500 to $1,000 a week. I mean, a weekend from Friday night until Sunday afternoon.
Yep. And how many members in the band?
There were 6. But
so you're splitting it 6 ways? Yep.
Well, no, because we put the money. We were living at home. We were young. A lot of us were. Later on, it became an issue. But in the beginning, we put the money in the bank.
Good.
Mrs. Madden and Mrs. Gates. And people were looking out for us, and we put the money in the bank, and we'd have $500 or $600. And then I learned pretty quickly that you could just call up these studios in New York, and if you had the money, you could go in and record. So we had done that several times.
Bell Sound.
Bell Sound is where it started.
Yep.
Columbia is where we cut Bust Out.
Yes.
And the reason we ended up at Columbia was because they were all on strike. The producers and the engineers in Manhattan were on strike at this particular time. This is a great story. And we showed up, and they wouldn't let us into the studio. And finally, talked our way. We got into the studio and recorded the song, but they wouldn't give us a regular union engineer. So this guy that ran the camera on the Today Show in New York, he said he'd do it. So we walked into that old studio at Columbia, it's all set up, and started playing. This guy turned out to be fabulous.
No
and
kidding.
we cut this Bust Out. We had cut Please Love Me Now, which was another Northern Lights record in there, and we cut several other ones that ended up on the album.
Did you do Blackout?
No, they were done earlier.
They were done earlier.
But Bust Out and Please Love Me Now and Do You Know were all cut that day in that Columbia studio.
With the cameraman.
With the cameraman. But this guy,
Love it.
well, this guy turned out to cut a lot of hits afterwards.
Sure.
But that's what he started with. And right after us, that studio closed down. They opened up the church in Manhattan, and that's where they were cutting the Bobby Darin things and some of the other things later on. But Splish Splash, you remember that by Bobby Darin?
Yeah.
That was cut in that studio. Dee Dee Diner was cut in that Frankie Avalon. It was a great little studio. It was a quarter of the size of this place.
Yeah.
But it produced good records, and Bust Out was cut there.
Amazing. So, who wrote Typhoid? Was Alan Arkin? Group effort? What happened with Typhoid? Typhoid was originally what Bust Out was called.
Yes. Alan Orkins came down with this idea. And when Orkins came in, we all added parts. I mean, I added my bass part. The sax player added, Dick Knorr added his part. And then when Dick Knorr got drafted, that was another issue with the Northern Lights, was the draft in those days.
Oh yeah, you lost personnel.
Yeah, we lost personnel because of the draft. And then somebody else would copy his part, and somebody else would copy his part. And when you got it all done, what came out on that record is what had been the product of 2 or 3, or at least 2 or 3 different sets of musicians for each one, because there was never another bass player, but there was another drummer, and there was 2 drummers, and the first drummer played what he played, and the second drummer played what he played, and the second sax player played what the first guy did as close as he could, but it wasn't that close. I mean, it was their own
it sort of evolves and takes on its own life. Right?
And then they liked that record down there in Philly, and when we cut it in 1960. I believe in October of 1960, we couldn't find anybody that wanted to put it out in 61. And it got to 62, and I was in Bell Sound doing some other work for some other record. And I said to this guy, I said, if you know somebody that can help us with this record, we'll be willing to make a deal.
Yep.
So in comes Harry Finfer, who I didn't know at the time, and he liked the record. He brought it down to Philly. His partners liked the record, and he called this guy up that had given him the engineer that I had talked to, give him the original word on the record, and the guy never called me.
Yeah.
He took the money that Finfer gave him and put it in his pocket.
Sold the rights to Finfer, right?
Right. No, he sold it right. He didn't have the right.
He didn't have the right to sell, but he took the money, and Finfer thought he'd bought the song.
Thought he bought the song.
Right.
And go ahead.
No, I want to get back to this in a minute. I want to go into that deeper and tell the story about what happened the first time you heard the song and how all this went, but we need to take a break for a second.
Okay.
That's okay.
We'll be right back.
You're so accommodating. Okay, so my guest today is Jack Baker from the Busters, and we're going to take a little break. We'll be back in a moment.
Underwriting for the Money Doctor Show is provided by Ryan and Casey Liquors, Main Street, Greenfield. Exploring the world, one glass at a time. West County Equipment Rental of Shelburne. Daily, weekly, monthly rentals. 625-6463 or on the web at westcountyequipment.com. The Franklin County Community Development Corporation. Growing sustainable businesses and communities since 1979. www.fccdc, Weld Communications, Marketing and Publicity. Helping businesses spread the word in the Pioneer Valley and beyond. www.weldwords.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Money Doctor. My guest today is Jack Baker from the Busters, and welcome back, Jack.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Jack.
Nice
that
to
has
be
such a
back.
nice ring.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so at the break we were talking about, I just want to go back and recap a little timeline on when Bust Out came out. You wrote it the group wrote it in 1960?
The group wrote it about 60, probably 1960.
Okay, and then a couple of years of not getting it played anywhere. 63 happens, you managed to get this record cut.
We got the record cut in early, probably 1960, in October
Okay.
of 1960.
All right.
But the record stayed in an acetate form. We were talking about
Yes,
that earlier.
acetate,
and
yeah.
we had played it around to different radio and record people, and they weren't interested.
Couldn't get it. And then Harry Finfer enters the picture.
Well, the first thing that we were putting it on an album, because we had decided to put it on an album.
Rather than
and
a
we
single.
were mixing the album at Bell Sound.
Yep.
And one of the guys that were down there said, I said to him, look, if you find somebody interested in this song, let us know.
Help us out.
That
Right.
it was called Typhoid at the time.
Yep.
We would be more than glad to talk with them.
It was called Typhoid, and the band was called the Northern Lights.
That's correct. It was called Typhoid, and the band was called the Northern Lights. So anyway, he was supposed to have gotten back to me. I never heard from him. Didn't think any more about it. And we were playing down the Hamden Manor. That was down in Holyoke, Hamden Ponds, not Hamden
Hamden
Manor.
Ponds, yeah.
Hamden Ponds. And one night, and I used to listen to my buddy over in KVW Buffalo, Joey Reynolds. And I switched because Chicago was an hour behind Buffalo. When Joey went off the air, I would turn on Dick Biondi at WLS in Chicago.
And you could get them.
Oh yeah,
you
in
could
those
get them
days,
here.
you could no problem.
Sure.
So anyway, I'm driving down the highway, and apparently part of the drummers
drummer,
behind me,
yeah.
and Biondi goes up to the news with this song called The Busters, and I didn't think anything until I heard the song.
He
And
leads into the news with it.
He leads into the news with it. And it was the Busters and a song called Bust Out.
Sure.
And I slammed on the brakes. Parker's right behind me, almost ran into me from the rear end. I just, come here. And we heard it. And the next morning at 9 o'clock, I was sitting at Bell Sound Studios in New York asking Al Weintraub what happened. You know?
Yeah.
Had no idea what had happened. And he called Finfer, and Harry came up. Absolutely, I knew it was a hit by then, and in Boston was starting to play it, and I'd heard it 3 or 4 times in Boston after that, so I knew that this record was making it nationwide. And we made a deal and went back, and some of the guys in the Northern Lights were married by this time, had kids, didn't want to go out and take a chance on the road with some fly-by-night
Sure.
45.
They didn't want to go and tour.
They were used to making their steady income because we were
Right.
playing the clubs at the time and the colleges on weekends. And so Francis Parda was the drummer, and myself put the group together, the Busters,
Yep.
and started out on the road.
So when I was doing my research, I read a little thing that said you were so excited when you heard the song on the radio, you pulled over to the side of the road, you're dancing on the side of the road.
Well, we weren't
and then
dancing on the
realized,
side, but
you were happy, right?
well,
and then realized,
absolutely. I
who
mean,
the heck are the Busters?
yeah,
and what
that's-
is Bust Out? Where's our song?
That's right. Where's our name?
Right.
And the theory behind that was that if you were we came from New England.
Mm-hmm.
Northern Lights certainly had a territorial name
Sure.
to it. And somebody down say, Memphis, Tennessee, or in
might
Tupelo,
not
Mississippi,
connect with Northern Lights.
We didn't want them to. This was 1960 or 1963. This is before all of the civil rights.
Yeah.
And you had to be careful what you were doing.
Yes.
And so some of the people in the Philadelphia area thought it would be much better
if it was
to separate themselves from
else,
that name and put Bust Out and Busters because it fit.
Because it fit, right,
Yeah.
right. It had to be something, though, to think that, you know, here you were, you knew you'd recorded the record, you'd asked this guy for help, he never calls you, you're driving down the road.
Not only didn't he call, but he took the money
and he took the money.
Gave him and split.
Right.
And so by the time we got to he had gone from the studio. He
I'm
wasn't
sure
in
he
the
had.
studio, but he had split before we got there, so we couldn't find him. And Harry ended up to be one of my best friends.
Yeah.
So Harry wouldn't lie to me. He told me what had happened, and that's what had happened.
Yeah, that's the nice part of the story when I was reading about it, is that Harry realized you guys really had written the song. Even though he thought he bought the rights lock, stock, and barrel, but he hadn't.
He hadn't.
And when he realized he hadn't, he made lemonade out of lemons.
But you're right. But you know, Harry was. The record people had a reputation of being hard.
Yes.
I didn't find him that way.
Yeah, that's what I think the nice part of the story is.
I think Don Seat, the guy that I worked for in Manhattan and was our manager down there, and looked out for me.
Yeah.
I mean, and if they had, I probably would have gotten really nailed somewhere along the way. But they looked out for me. I had a good life, and I enjoyed my time, and I just thank my lucky stars that it happened to me.
Yeah. You know, I mentioned in an earlier show there was a movie called That Thing You Do, which was written by Tom Hanks, and I think written by Tom Hanks. Anyway, he stars in it, and it is this kind of a story. It takes place in the 50s or 60s, and he's got a young band who has they call him a one-hit wonder. And
that's what we had. It was a one-hit wonder.
How do you reply to that? If somebody says you're a one-hit wonder, what do you?
Oh, absolutely. I was a one-hit wonder.
You do?
I was there when. In 1964 and 1965, 64 actually, the Beatles started to come in.
Yes.
And I was working, I gotten off the road, I spent 1.5 years on the road and decided that I had enough of this road and I was going to get myself a hotel room or an apartment and live like normal people live for a while.
Sure.
So I went to work for Don Seat. And part of Don Seat's entourage was Conway Twitty, Jerry Lee Lewis, the Hollywood Argyles, the Fenderman, Something Smith and the Redheads. He had a big entourage of musicians.
Stars
and
in the
I was very
catalog,
lucky to work with him. But the record, when Kennedy got assassinated, it changed the record business. Absolutely changed it from what it was to the Beatles and to the Beatle era, the British invasion era. And we knew that our 3-chord progression blues was not going to make it anymore.
Yeah, Erickson was quoted as saying, Richard Erickson, one of your musicians, was quoted as saying, when we heard Love Me Do by the Beatles, we knew our sound was over.
It was over. And Conway knew
And you
that.
knew it.
Yes, oh, absolutely. That's why Conway got involved with country music. And who in the world ever would dream what happened from 1964 to 1995? I mean, with Twitty would just...
Yeah, who would imagine?
You could... He did. I mean, he thought he did.
Yeah.
Conway, I hope I don't hit that mic again.
You're okay.
Conway thought he was.
Yeah.
But, there was a difference between what really happened and what you thought was going to happen.
Sure.
And it was, the whole thing was just... It totally blew my mind, and it made an impression on me all my life.
Well, I would think so. Speaking of blowing your mind and making an impression on you, after you had this hit record, you had to come home, start a band called the Busters, get them to do a tour?
Yes, from the
time you made the deal with Finfer.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked for Don Seat for a couple of years. In 1995, I came back and Conway went to...
Wait, it can't be 1995.
1965.
Okay.
Conway went to Nashville and did his thing down there because he worked for Don Seat, and I came up here to Greenfield and went into business with my father. I wanted a house, I wanted kids.
Right.
That business was not good for that kind of thing.
Wasn't conducive.
And 1965 to 1995, I worked at Barrett and Baker's.
Okay. So, and Barrett Baker's is still alive and
Oh,
well in
yeah,
downtown Greenfield,
absolutely.
Mass, of
My
course.
son Billy is there with bells on every morning.
Oh, that's good. Go back for a minute. I want to talk about some of the people you met. You make the deal with Finfer. He keeps the rights, if my research is correct. He keeps the rights to record. You get all the shows. You go out and do a tour, and you get some royalties.
Yes.
You've got to go back and get a band together called the Busters to be able to do this tour.
Well,
and
we did
only
that.
A couple of your
We did
members
that
wanted
within a
to
month.
stay.
I mean, we had the
Right.
band together within a month in August of 1963.
Okay, so now you go on tour,
Right.
and you do adult clubs, and then you do these teenage shows, and you play with people like
We played Jerry Lee and
Roy Orbison, Dion.
and there was Little Richard and Chuck Berry and all
Don
those
and
guys.
Juan, yeah.
We did all those shows.
Wow.
The Dick Clark Caravan of Stars, record hops. We went upstairs and downstairs and through auditoriums and climbed up into radio stations. We did the whole thing.
Amazing. Speaking of Chuck Berry, I read a quote that said, when you heard Chuck Berry sing Maybelline, that was it for you.
Well,
Is that true?
Listen, Old Carol was another one that I thought was pretty good. But I want to tell you that country music really influenced me.
Yes.
And that's where I was. I was a kid, and when you were a kid of 17, 18, 19 years old, rock and roll in 1957, 1958 was it. So
it was
you
cool.
went for a little while into that. And Chuck Berry's Maybelline, and any number of Elvis. I mean, when I heard Hound Dog, I thought I went to heaven. So
we've only got a few minutes left. I cannot close this show out without talking to you about American Bandstand.
Oh, American Bandstand. Well, Harry called me up and asked me if I'd do American Bandstand. I said, whatever. I said, absolutely.
Do you ever say no?
Yeah, no, I never said no.
Yes,
and
we'll do it.
I went down, and we went into Philadelphia. Unknown to us at the time, they had all these record hops ready for us to go to because WIBG was a big radio station in Philadelphia, and they wanted the airplay on IBG as well as the national airplay on American Bandstand. So yes, we did the American Bandstand. That in those days it was black and white. Yep. And it was a studio of, I'd say it was about this size with those bleachers that come out of the wall. Yep. And they let a whole pile of these girls and these guys in, and they would sit on the bleachers, and they would tape these shows from say 7 o'clock on Sunday night until 5 o'clock in the morning, and they'd have the whole week done. You're still in the business in production, and you do radio jingles and things like that, right? I do the jingles for radio stations and the news theme for WHAI radio. Yeah, the news theme, the sports theme, Baker Office Supply, which I would do anyway. Sure. Wilson's and Dillon's, and a lot of those little jingles that you hear every morning on the radio, and other stations all across the country. Boy, it's really been a pleasure. I thank you for doing it. I thank you for doing the show with Jay Fidanza on the fly, that people can find us. We had fun. We'll do it again someday. It was good fun. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you. I'm Dr. Frances Rayam. Thanks for watching another episode of The Money Doctor. Until our next chat, Jack Baker and I will remind you, keep it positive.
I remember just last week when you said you loved me so. You told me that you loved me and that you'd never ever let me go. All alone I walked to school, knowing I played the fool, and I guess I'll have to walk all alone. And I guess
there's a better life if I could be debt free, but oh, my money is a mystery. I was feeling overwhelmed and it was wearing thin when I knocked on the door and heard the doctor's in. Oh, the doctor's in, the doctor's doctor's in. She got the right prescription to help you win. Oh, the doctor's in. The money doctor's in.